I traveled out of the country right after finishing a huge 5-day work event where I got about 10 hours of sleep total during those 5 days. I was completely exhausted when I arrived at the motel, which was run down and in poor condition. The carpets were damp and the blankets felt damp as well, which added to my discomfort. However, I was so tired that I didn't really think about it. All I wanted was to get some much-needed rest. I checked in and headed straight to my room, barely noticing the outdated decor and the musty smell that permeated the place. The bed looked uninviting, but at that point I was too drained to care. I collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep almost immediately at around 8 p.m. local time, hoping to make up for the sleep I had lost over the past several days. At around 11 p.m., I was abruptly awakened by a ringing sound. Disoriented, I fumbled for the motel phone and groggily answered. A voice on the other end claimed there had been a complaint about noise coming from my room. Still half asleep, I assured them it was impossible since I had been sleeping soundly. The voice, which I assumed was a member of the motel staff, then asked if there could be someone else in the room making noise. Confused and slightly annoyed, I reiterated that I was alone, so there was definitely no one else causing any disturbance. The voice persisted, asking again if I was sure I was alone and not causing any noise. My irritation grew as I confirmed for the third time that I was alone and had been sleeping since 8 p.m. The conversation felt strange and unnecessarily persistent, but in my exhausted state, I didn't dwell on it. I hung up and fell back asleep immediately, desperate to reclaim the precious rest I had been lacking. The next morning, as I lay in bed, I replayed the interaction in my mind. The call seemed increasingly odd. There had been no noise that I could hear from my room or anywhere nearby. The repeated questioning about whether I was alone struck me as particularly strange. Later, when I spoke to the actual motel staff, they confirmed that they had never called my room that night. I then realized that the call had likely come from someone else, possibly checking who was in the rooms and how many people were there. This realization sent a chill down my spine. The whole situation seemed suspicious and potentially dangerous. I was immensely relieved that I always used the extra latch chain lock on the door. That small precaution might have been what kept me safe that night. My father embarked on a trip to Tanzania with a group to perform medical work in a poor village. The group's mission was to provide much-needed healthcare services, and they were all eager to make a positive impact. For a few nights of the trip, the group stayed in a modest hotel, which, while not luxurious, offered basic amenities for the travelers. The rooms were simple, with 2 single beds, a small bathroom, and minimal furnishings. My dad was sharing a room with another man from the group. They had separate beds, which provided some privacy and personal space. The first couple of nights were uneventful. Both men were exhausted from their long days of medical work and fell asleep quickly each night. However, on the third night, my dad was abruptly woken up by his roommate, who had turned on the light. The sudden brightness was jarring, and as my dad's eyes adjusted, he noticed that his roommate looked terrified. The man was trembling and praying fervently, his face pale and his hands shaking. My dad, still groggy and disoriented, asked what was wrong. Despite my dad's concern and repeated questions, the roommate refused to say anything about it, leaving my dad puzzled and worried. Unable to coax any information from his distressed roommate and unsure of what else to do, my dad tried to offer some comfort, but ultimately decided to go back to sleep. He hoped that whatever had frightened his roommate would pass, and that they could discuss it in the morning. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and my dad found it difficult to fall back asleep, his mind racing with concern for his roommate and curiosity about what had happened. The next night, my father experienced something that left him deeply unsettled. In the middle of the night, he woke up with an urgent need to pee. Trying not to disturb his roommate, he quietly got out of bed and made his way to the bathroom. As he began to relieve himself, he suddenly caught a very strong scent of body odor. This was unusual because he and most of the people from the group were daily deodorant wearers, being from the US. The smell was overpowering and distinct, and it immediately struck him as odd. He knew that many locals in Tanzania didn't wear deodorant as frequently, so the smell made him realize that he and his roommate might not be alone. A chill ran down his spine as he turned around, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Standing in the doorway was a local woman. She was shaking violently, her eyes rolled up and locked on the ceiling. Her presence was eerie and inexplicable, as no one should have been able to enter their room. My father panicked, his heart racing. He couldn't fathom how this woman had gotten into their room, which had been securely locked. In a moment of confusion and fear, he turned back toward the bathroom, trying to gather his thoughts. When he turned back around, the woman was gone, as if she had never been there. The sudden disappearance was baffling and added to his growing sense of unease. Shaken and bewildered, my father returned to bed, trying to convince himself that he had been dreaming or hallucinating. He lay back down on his side, attempting to calm his racing mind. As the adrenaline started to wear off, he began to doze off again, desperately needing rest after the unsettling encounter. Just as he was about to drift off, the strong smell of body odor returned, filling his nostrils and jolting him awake. He slowly rolled over and looked to his left. There, in the bed beside him, was the woman, lying flat on her back, her eyes glued to the ceiling. She was in the exact same position as before, her presence more terrifying in the confined space of the room. Panicking once again, my father broke his line of sight, closing his eyes tightly and hoping she would disappear. When he opened his eyes again, the woman was gone. The bed was empty, and the room was silent. My father was unable to get back to sleep, his mind racing with questions and fear. He lay awake, his heart pounding, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains. The experience left him deeply disturbed and unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. The next morning, my father cautiously asked his roommate about the previous night's events. His roommate revealed that he had encountered the same woman the night before, which was why he had been so shaken and unable to speak about it. They both realized that something inexplicable and frightening had happened to them, leaving them both rattled and anxious about the nights to come. Throughout the day, they mulled over possible explanations. One plausible theory they considered was the side effects of the anti-malarial drugs they were taking. These medications are known to cause vivid and sometimes disturbing dreams, hallucinations, and other psychological effects. The idea that both men might have experienced a drug-induced hallucination offered some rational explanation, but it didn't completely quell their unease. However, the fact that both my father and his roommate experienced the same hallucination in such vivid detail remained a mystery. Could the medication have caused them to share the same eerie vision, or was there something more inexplicable at play? The consistency in their experiences added an element of the supernatural to their rational considerations, making it hard to dismiss the encounters as mere side effects of the drugs. For the rest of the trip, my father and his roommate took extra precautions. They double-checked the locks on their door and kept the lights on at night, hoping to ward off any further strange occurrences. Despite their efforts to focus on their medical work, the unsettling experience lingered in the back of their minds. Each creak of the floor or rustle of the curtains made them jumpy, and they found it hard to shake the feeling of being watched. We were traveling with another couple who had budget restrictions and needed to find a last-minute place to stay in Las Vegas. We had been looking forward to a nice hotel with a pool where we could relax and chill out. However, they couldn't afford it, so they found a super cheap Airbnb with a pool. Trying to be good, flexible travelers, we agreed to compromise. As we were driving to the place, I tried to ignore the increasing amount of poverty and the strung-out people on the streets looking lost. We pulled into the apartment lot, and I said nothing. My husband and I looked at each other. It looked like a seedy apartment complex straight out of District 13. As we walked into the building, I was overcome by a smell. It was sweet yet horrible beyond belief, with a layer of perfume on top. My body wouldn't let me breathe in the smell, and I had to cover my mouth with my shirt sleeve to avoid gagging. I was at the tail end of the flu, had been nauseous for days, and figured I was just being sensitive. We hurried to see the pool, but it had a big sign saying, "Under renovation." Covering my mouth as we went back into the building, we checked out our apartment. It was clean, and the smell didn't permeate it, so we agreed to stay. The next morning, I woke up having had the worst dreams of my life. I dreamt of people getting hurt and beaten up. It was a night filled with constant drama and horror in my head. My husband seemed interested in what I had dreamt, but I didn't want to get into it, so I just said that I dreamt of people getting hurt. When we got home a couple of days later, I brought up the smell in the hallway. It wasn't until then that my husband told me it was the odor of a badly decayed human body. Why he decided to not mention it to me when we were there, I still don't know.